Hello and welcome to the first video of this new series on the channel. I'll be focusing on books already posted and provide some context in terms of translations. Just going through each page and translating as much as I can to provide background information on some of the channel's more interesting books. So please remember that these translations will be rough, merely using online tools. They won't be perfect, and there will most definitely be blunders on my part. So we're all here to learn, at least that's the idea. The intent is I'll get better, and if it becomes something that people enjoy and get value from, then I will continue. And fine-tune the episodes as I go. I do want to take a moment to thank those of you who watch consistently. I was initially very hesitant to post these book presentations. However, something has compelled me to do so. And now I'm quite glad that I did. The overwhelming support, this small and strange corner of the interwebs has gained is exceptional. It's an honor that you are willing to take the time to watch these videos and explore with me. It is indeed your most valuable resource, time that is. So I'll try my best to respect it and not ramble too much. I'm by no means an expert on these books, or history, or anything for that matter. I'm merely offering more nuance in this realm of alternative history, so any opinions should be taken as that, an opinion. I'm not here to tell you what to think. This is only my exploration of these topics and documents. These books that I've been collecting and combing through for years, and information within their pages should be shared and explored and easily accessible, and that's why I post a link to these books' original source in every video. It is the internet, and it's not much, but it's the best that I can do right now. I trust that people watching can deduce their own conclusions from any information discussed and shown that may correlate with any research that they have done. Hopefully these videos may inspire you to go do some digging for yourself. This exploration has ignited that sense of wonder and imagination in the world again. It seems to be pushing the boundaries of my personal paradigms and overall views of not only history but our collective cosmology. It seems our true past may be much stranger than fiction. So if that interests you, welcome. I truly hope that those of you watching gain something of value from this presentation and from these types of videos and from this library. Again, it is not my intention to sway your opinion one way or the other. You just need to sit back, relax, listen, and watch. Make your own conclusions. This is simply more information on some incredibly beautiful, enigmatic, and imaginative works within our past. It seems the question becomes, how much is imagination, if any? So, thank you all for being here. Let's begin. So this reading will be just the introduction of this book titled Tower of Babel, or the Tower of Babel, from 1679. Essentially what I've done is isolated each page of this book, put it through Google to translate, and will simply read the results. There may be some words that didn't quite get translated, which I will do my best to clarify. And I may just do the same with words that I don't know or understand in the context within the pages, for my own benefit in learning and hopefully for those listening along. So if you're interested in learning about the Tower of Babel, then you can learn about it with me. Now, starting with our title page, just as a side, there may be some writing on the sides of these pages that was also translated. I'm going to primarily stick to just the text within the book. So, Athanasi Kacheri, Society of Jesus, the Tower of Babel, or the Archantology. Now, Archantology is, just as an explanation, is the study of historical offices and important positions in state, international, political, religious, and other organizations and societies. So moving along to the term below it, QUA translates to which or as far as. So the Tower of Babel, or the Archantology, which first the life of the princes after the flood, the manners and the greatness of their deeds. Second, the structure of the tower and the destruction of the states, the confusion of languages and the migration of nations, together with the history of the principal idioms derived therefrom, will be described and explained with great learning under the auspices. Now, auspices meaning kindly patronage and or guidance. So under the auspices of this term translates to I am very grateful, just using the Latin counterpart. So I'm going to postulate that this either says under the auspices of the grateful and wise Caesar, or the great and the wise Caesar, Leopold I. And that concludes our title page. Joannes Paulus Oliva, President of the General Society of Jesus. If some of the theologians of the Society have recognized the work which is inscribed in the Tower of Babel by P. Athanasio Kachero, the priest of the Society, and have approved it in the light of the this passage here, this term Edipof, it didn't quite translate. So this passage actually translates to, and they proved that it could be brought into the light. So the priest of the Society proved that it could be brought into the light. We make it possible for it to be ordered in print, and it will be seen by those to whom it pertains. Given at Rome, February 10th, 1672. Most Sacred Leopold I, to the Emperor Augustus, just, pio, happy. So pio meaning to appease. So just, pio, happy. Bohemia, Hungary, and this one I wasn't quite sure, possibly Roman or Rome, the Roman king. Three greatest, or the great thrice. Athanasius Kacherus. He prays for eternal happiness. Poft the morning, so I translated Poft Luctofam, basically translating to I want to mourn. So I want to mourn. Here it says the morning of the universal flood. but maybe it is, I want to mourn the universal flood and the destruction of the Noahic Ark, maybe the tragic extermination of the human race. I want the world of the earth and all the fruits of all things to have the word is Triftius, what it translated to, but what that actually means. This was actually interesting. So alone, I translated the Latin counterpart, and alone, it means the thriftiest. However, when I translated it with facium, so the triftif imam facium, it translates to the trickiest face. So that passage would say, I want the world of the earth and all the fruits of all things to have the trickiest face, still dwelling there, excavated, that the rash man of human impiety, impiety meaning a lack of reverence or lack of reverence for God or sacred things. So the rash man of human impiety had attempted with foolish presumption to raise the fabric of the highest bounds of the heavens. I mean the fabric which, with the curse of the divine majesty, while it had falsely raised to the summit the undue arrogance of human affairs, with the thunderbolt of the vindictiveness of the falsity, disfigured. It is tamed. So also I was a clear example of the gravest example, taught all the power of the past generation of the human race, and will teach it. I will not turn against the Lord, perished by fate for what could be the example of worldly imbecility. And imbecility, ravaged, I here bring forth an example of that unfortunate and unappreciated arrogance of the, this word here. It didn't translate to anything, not that I could find. So I did end up translating the whole passage of Latin individually, and it reads as follows. I here bring to light that unfortunate and unappreciated example of the most shameful arrogance. So fairly similar. Moving on. And I wish I could draw it so universally before their eyes that they may see how the tragic fire in this theater of ambition closes the stage with catastrophe, and let them accomplish it, for there is no other way to expect the crown of the work which impiety is wrought upon than a heap and a grave, which will bury the author of the wicked prayers in the fall of dung. This is because I would have believed no one on the side of a clear-eyed mind, who, as I have tried to dispel with my eyes, would have strongly trusted how much the Babylonians, if the perverters of the childish mind were forced to fail by the further beginning of the millennium's progress of the heavens, that is to say, by the admirable confusion of tongues among the false gods, who, the infamous founders of the transmigration of nations and peoples and the forks, propagated throughout the world, such as, I say, these sparful woman. So this translates to scattered. So I say these scattered women of unhappiness have de-feminized the calamity of all human poverty, for Nemrod struck with the sword of ambition in so great a multitude of mortals, and in addition to this a gigantic body of formidable habit, with great strength and power, was confident of his greatness, and rejected the worship of the religion of his forefathers, by the precepts of the fathers of Noah, the first monarch of the world, of the lower world, receding, degenerate, and refractory, while he attempts the title of the divine Apotheophos. So this didn't have a definition that I could find anyways, and no real translation, but it may be related to apotheosize, potentially, just meaning to exalt or elevate or to glorify. So divine apotheosis with an impious deed, trampling on divine and human rights. He was the first to leave the world. The river, not long ago cleansed by the deluge, was contaminated by the abominable tyranny, idolatry, and innumerable corruptions to be discovered flowing from it. Seeing how impious he was, and not only struck by the inmost pain of his heart, that restorer of the human race, Noah, soon by a divine nod, bequeathed to his sons of Shem and Japheth, the sons of the impious Ham, the right way, which probably Nemrod, had corrupted. He did not lack any means to restore the propagation of the divine worship, that we may be taught from thence that no battering ram is more violent than impiety for overthrowing the fates of empires and kingdoms. So this is prefidium, so that translates to prejudgment. So no prejudgment can be more strongly given to those who are gathered together and supported by piety and religion. Wherefore I have heretofore, which means before or previously, exhibited the image of both the primitives of this empire, or a certain prototype of the rest, in the features of the volume which I have written as kings of the earth and rulers of the world, what should be properly reconciled to reason, what should be diffused, finally, what is composed and conformed to the norm of the divine director, and what is not, are contemplated as if any kind of careful examination of the mind. This indeed by no other better right than the most sacred Caesar, who in the Republic you hold the stern and the nail of Christ. So this is Christiana, which is Christian. So the nail of Christian, or the Christian, or Christianity, and say to the feet of the majesty that I lay down the bow in obedience to the will of thee. So this, sorry, I'm just checking my notes here. This translated to the of the weakest will, but the whole passage translated to I respectfully submit to the best wishes. And then it continues venerable. Venerable meaning it was a title used by the Catholic Church. So it's a title used for Catholics whose heroic virtue had been proclaimed by the Church. So continuing on. Suffer, most auspicious Emperor, for your sake in all your piety and clemency. Clemency being, I think it's to be merciful. The small fruits of my labors, as if most attached to your lowest fervency. Fervency is an intense or passionate feeling. So attached to your lowest fervency, rest at your feet under whose immense shadow the peace and felicity. So this felicity is a cause or source of happiness or bliss. So peace and felicity of the universe rests, in whose auspicious head of the, this, I thought it was species, but I don't think this translated to anything. Yeah, I was unsure, and possibly just a mistranslation because it doubles up on the words, which does happen sometimes in these translations. And you will probably hear me read a passage or two that sounds repetitive, and that's not in the Latin, it's just in the translation. So it may just be a mistranslation. So, of the most auspicious head, they watch over the guards, Confilius and Industria. This actually is, so Confilium and Industria. So translated to conflict and industry. So watch over the guards of conflict and industry, who the two most perfect eyes of your mind, truly aquiline. And aquiline is to have the characteristics of an eagle. So I'm going to postulate that it is just, in the context of this sentence, saying that you have the perfect eyes of your mind being eagle-like, or never with the slightest strain deflect their line from the rays of eternal sun. So having your eyes lined like an eagle towards the rays of the eternal sun. Continuing on. Tending to every part of this is studies, for God and the people faithfully occupied, in whose incomparable souls uncuffed leaf, piety, and judiciousness, the greatest part of the paternal inheritance, fixed the royal faith, he said. So, before I start this page, I would just like to say this page in particular has a few more notes than usual, so please bear with me. I'll try to be concise and efficient. We'll see how that goes. I have the Latin counterparts of my notes, but I'm not going to attempt the entire passages. That's why I've included the original text alongside the translated pages, so you can confirm for yourself what I'm referencing, or correct me if I'm wrong, and I'll be wrong. This is the equivalent of a stab in the dark at this type of work. So, moving along. He is silent, said Tiberius. A mind not capable of so great a weight, fed major, I would entrust him with the administration of the empire, as he had exactly and prudently conformed to the noemetic archetype of this archetype, and is surprised. For he who was nourished either by the thickest layers of wild beasts, or by the innermost crags of impenetrable mountains, is now pushed either by your valor or by the nefarious confederacy of others, and dangers never heard of by anyone in the age, by which your head was forged, and the whole of Austria united in you. Was home life destroyed by smoke? What place can be so distant from the world and the seas, where the fame of your name has not reached, and the most pious air has not reached? What corner of the world is alien to all humanity? O infamy of times and manners. So this next sentence, well, this is where it begins. All right. So this next sentence translates to, O the most polluted dung of the tartaric yeast, or tartaric. Tartaric acid. So basically, yeah, just briefly look this up. Of the tartaric yeast, and tartaric yeast is essentially tartaric acid, and that plays an important role in winemaking by lowering the pH level, or the acidity, to a level where the more undesirable spoilage bacteria cannot live, and can also act as a preservative after the fermentation process. So the line after that also didn't get translated, but the Latin counterpart translates to, O foulest cancer of the world. And the next section, the next line down, that starts off portents of the world, faticence, that translates to wonders of the world. So Ophalis, cancer of the world, and then wonders of the world. Peeves of the human race, infernal vipers, detectable, I say, the Catalians of the empire, who 5 blind men, drunken with the potion of ambition, 5 maddened by the fury of a foolish mind, so that the Tower of Babylon might be the Tower of Babylon, that is, the smoke of confusion, permeating the profane with brutal deed. They would construct in the air what this is Spades. So basically just had to translate the Latin from turning the F to an S, and it changes to, they would create spaces of imagination, or in the context of the sentence, they would construct in the air the spaces of a vain imagination, and erect the leaves with the end of their beaks, erected verily, verily just meaning in truth. So in truth by God, verily by God, they were far away. Not to better or worse, I say, they were afraid to bring it to faith. But they were afraid that the divine providence of the empire, the structure of so many stars, would completely overthrow the structure of the empire that had been destroyed with great majesty by the Atlanteans of the, and this translates to Austrians. So Atlanteans of the Austrians, or going from the Latin, from the Austrian Atlanteans. So, moving on. We're not going to explore a puzzling term like Austrian Atlanteans. I mean, are these the Atlanteans of old? From myths, legends, stories? From Plato and Solon and the ancient priests of Egypt? I mean, this is the first I'm hearing about Atlanteans being associated with a quote-unquote modern country. Well, modern in terms of Atlantis, the myth, supposedly prehistoric. Or is it? Maybe is the better question. The label myth or legend seems to indicate an ancientness to it in general. They're basically stories so old, they have little to no literary evidence. It's like, you know if you know. That's old. And to mention that an empire of great majesty was destroyed by these Atlanteans, if I'm reading this correctly, the Latin counterpart is quite clear, and it is Austrian Atlanteans. So, what are your thoughts about this? Opinions, data points, share them below, share them in the comments. I'd love to read them. Anyways, let's continue. And with the secret schemes of the Atlanteans, they would put on a new one for me. Caligula. Now, Caligula, I didn't know what that was. It's actually a nickname for a Roman emperor, the third Roman emperor, actually, ruled from 37 AD until he was assassinated in 41 AD. So, this was a nickname meaning little boot for Gaius Caesar Augustus Germanicus. So, Caligula, who wished to use the single neck of the Roman people, seemed to have received a new, and this term didn't seem to have a translation. I literally just put unknown in my notes. It's a little vague. But, yeah, so moving on. From the underworld, so as to fill the bloodiest and most abundant fury of the world with a single stroke and decapitate the head of the world. The fatal giants of the gigantic Gigantomachy. So, Gigantomachy is essentially one of the most popular myths in Greece, being the battle between the Olympian gods and the giants in antiquity. So, according to the myth, the giants attacked the gods, but the Olympians learned that they could only be victorious if a mortal helped them. So they called upon Heracles to help them, and they eventually won the battle. So continuing on your fair head, the quick head of the Christian world, the corpse of the world, perfidy, meaning breach of trust or treachery, and the webs of bruises, soaked in all evils and poisons, and the fury of the Vifania. This translates to, by changing the V to a U, which is, it seems to be a common interchangeable letter with translations between Latin and English. It then reads of joy, so that would be the fury of joy, or the fury of the joy, were trembling so that they might break off the thread of the most august house, which had been brought together in divine service. With an abominable abomination, they would pull up your death by the roots, but in vain, which they certainly perftolared. This Latin translation, I couldn't find anything, so I translated the whole Latin passage. And what I ended up doing was changing in this passage, changed an F to an S in ifted to isted, and then did the same with baffin. So I changed the F to an S, meaning basin or basin. So then it reads as follows: in the event of the nullity, which they were certainly pre-peddling, that leaf destroyed the Eucharistic base and the incomparable prince's idea so boldly for Rodolfo, so fondly founded, and immediately by so many, this term, aguftifimos, translates to the most important, so most likely meaning and immediately by so many important grandsons, or the most important grandsons of piety, and the worship of all virtues, that to the end of the world the divine oracles of thee. Again, this is another series of sentences that had a tough time translating. So I did the same thing for the Latin term beneficence, changing the F in the middle of that term to an S. It then reads the entire passage, that at the extremity of the dying world, the divine oracles of folate are believed to be dead. Now, folate is apparently salt, or a type of acid. Now, however, I also changed the F to an S in the Latin term palladium to soladium, or soladium, and it then reads the entire passage, that at the end of the dying world, the divine oracles are believed to be the comfort of the dead. So this seems to be more probable, but again, I'm no expert, merely just exploring. Maybe we have some more experienced linguists listening and can comment. Anyways, moving on. These Babylonians have tried to undermine the enemies of impiety, for how much the hatred of your enemies conspired to destroy you, only for your protection of the good of all those who live in you. Their passions were awake, their pious vows were made, their infidelities were burning with fire. how much these pretentious builders of swiftness to bury the public disaster in your destruction, so much Iftor. This term Iftor I was unsure about. The Latin is Iftorum, and it did translate to Iftor, but I could not find an exact definition for that. The only thing that came up was iftar. Not sure if it's related, but iftar is the meal that Muslims eat after sunset during Ramadan to break the day's fast. So moving on. Nay, the heaven of the most, next term here, which is pifimorum in Latin, which essentially translates to of the finest. So in context, it would be nay, the heaven of the most fine, or heaven of the finest, care of your care, or rather to strengthen the safety resting on you. They labored with every snow. Thus all are in vain against the bounds of the mighty God, both by the childish swelling and furious preemption of the mind, and by the secret machinations of the unfaithful. I say these things not for the amusement of your ears, for I hate this kind of allurement. How much before with horror at so many fast monsters the minds of all were oppressed. So sweet and pious now is the memory of these to the folly of the souls of others, to the auspiciousness of the wild seasons, to the more fertile ground of the public forest, in which we are raised by the pleasant memory of the benefits of so many generations, never to be obliterated by the oblivion of the stars. Henceforth, so many thrifts, it translates to republic. So henceforth, so many thrifts republic, or the republic of thrifts. Unsure, I may need to translate that entire passage. The mists of Christian or Christianity, perhaps extinguished by the fires of execrable. This basically means detestable or abhorrent or abominable. Execrable. Furies at last are wider omens, and not even in vain. Auspiciousness we take it for granted. For inasmuch as the world of Christians, the good of the divine providence had befallen thee, surely it was not in vain that in the world of thy birth it seemed to be. This next word, now with the end of this passage here, at the very end it says, in the world of thy sighted. So this first term, inuenif, in Latin, translates to hint. And the end here, if you look on the Latin page, you can see that the term felicitatis, it translates to happiness. So this last passage may be translated as, surely it was not in vain that in the world of thy birth it seemed to be hinted in the world of thy happiness, or the world of happiness. And on that day, apparently that's fun. I thought this may be a mistranslation, but it is indeed what it translates to, according to its Latin counterpart. They would not be augured by the foolish world given, by which so this term, I ended up translating the entire Latin passage because that particular term didn't quite translate. So I changed the first F to an S in the word fruftra. So it would say sruftra. And the passage then reads as follows. They were not to be cursed by the foolishness given to the world, by which SS, the most auspicious memory of Primi and Feliciani, was held. So, moving on. I mean, they congratulated him on the publication of the world, who restored to the unhappiness of the times the happiness which had long been lost. And this one, the Latin is rifum. It didn't translate to anything. However, changing the F to an S reads as again. Now, it also had a lot of other words, including backward, behind, on the contrary, in return, and a few others. Let's continue. Which had not been heard for a long time, would nevertheless introduce the argument of a huge, this term, the Latin is literally spelled FPEI, which seemed to be meaningless. However, changing the F to an S read as hope. So argument of a huge hope into the list of names of the, now this term, in the Latin, it was Cephoriorum, Cephoriorum. And that didn't translate it as anything. However, again, changing the F to an S, it then read Caesarea. So, and just as a side, Caesarea was an ancient seaport in northwest Israel, or essentially the Roman capital of Palestine. That so happy was the birth of this term. I ended up translating just those two words, and they didn't come up with anything. So I replaced all three F's to S's in that first term, and it reads as follows: the most august professors. Now, we've heard this term august used before in the reading, and it actually refers to inspiring reverence or admiration, or to be venerable or venerable, which we have defined earlier in this reading. Was at last proved by the event of fortune when he was crowned with the name Leopold I and inaugurated as emperor, and that he did not lack. Now, this term is a bit interesting because I ended up translating most of the Latin passage, and it reads as follows: and that it is not lacking in hypocrisy. Now, I did another translation. I changed the F to an S, basically saying mysterio, and got a slightly different passage. And that one reads, and that it is not without mystery. So Leopold was either not lacking in hypocrisy or was without mystery, possibly. We made 50 of all the Caesars and kings of Germany under the initial L of your name, decorated with the letters of L of the, now this term, the Latin is auguftorium. It translates directly to of the listeners. Now again, I replaced the F to an S, and it changes to Augustus, which is probably, or more likely, the accurate translation. Moving on. So that you would not complete the folly of the Jubilee of the Emperors with a mere epilogue, you would have fed and ordered something else with the auspices of greater happiness. How in faith long ago they had raised the Christian orb, the most, this term, the Latin counterpart, it translates to the most important. So the most important endowments of your most lively character, with this term is fuma in Latin, which translates to smoke. So with the smoke of enthusiasm, you have the most active character, a happy frenzy of mind, blooming in the countenance, capable of great thoughts and judgment, prudence, venerable in the prime of age, in the prince of a young, this term, let me just check, it didn't translate as anything, so I ended up doing more of the Latin passage, and it translated to read the following: in the young prince, the breast of the fennel. So fennel, just meaning a plant, basically of the parsley family, that has feathery leaves and yellow flowers. So in truth of life and such an indulgence of fortune, the decency of the most, this term did not translate to anything as well. So what I ended up doing with the Latin counterpart, now this one was a bit interesting. I have a few different variations. So changing the first F of this term to an S, it read as the most punishable. And then changing the first one back, and then changing the last two F's to S's, then read the most difficult. And then if I changed all the F's to S's, it then read as the most chastised. So hard to say which one it is. I will just continue on. To all the rules of modesty, and of all the paternal virtues in the growing maturity, and lest the catalogue of your praises should be brought to the ears of the most numerous filth, rather than the delights I gather here, I will briefly summarize them. The dignity of the fume, or which is smoke, was dignified, and the inferiority of your mind was so inferior to the inferiority of the empire, that you, the Atlantean beast. Now this term, this is a bit interesting, considering we just read the Atlantean beast. This term initially did not have any translation, so I did more of the passage, and again, this is one that continued to change with the more Latin I included in the translation. So the first translation I did from the Latin counterparts literally translates to kill the Atlanteans. And I translated a bit more, adding one more term, and it then reads as the greatness of the Atlanteans. So does this passage read as follows: that you, the Atlantean beast, killed you so that you did not have an empire? Unknown. So continuing on, you would seem to confer a crown on the empire. Therefore, with these virtues, and I would lead them, who seem to shine before the throne of the imperial leaf, like the most brilliant of all, to the throne of so great a republic, the rudder moved before all things, your most skillful father, most wise Caesar, left to you to impress the political documents of the Christian in the innermost heart, never began to cultivate now this term, the Latin counterpart translated to furiously. Now, I changed the F to an S, and it then read diligently. So either term didn't really fit in the context, but it may be, and never began to cultivate the diligence that obscured the eyes of the mind, or it could possibly be to cultivate the furiousness that obscured the eyes of the mind. Exactly circumscribing those impious political doctrines, false political doctrines, fed the most fruitful and true treachery, with which, like firmaments, kingdoms and worldly principalities are flourished. They are surrounded by, now this term, the Latin was fubditorum, which by itself translated to fubditors, which is strange because that also didn't seem to mean anything. However, changing the F to an S, it then reads as subjects, or they are surrounded by subjects. These firmaments, like that divine Pythagoras tetractine, as a side, the tetractine is, or the tetrad, let me just double check here, is a triangle figure consisting of 10 points arranged in 4 rows. 1, 2, 3, and 4 points in each row, which is the geometrical representation of the 4th triangular number. As a mystical symbol, it was very important to the secret worship of Pythagoreanism. There were 4 seasons, and the number was also associated with planetary motions and music. Symbolized the 4 classical elements, air, fire, water, and earth, represented organization of space, and I will try to just put a quick example here of how it looks. It essentially looks like how you would set up bowling pins in a triangular formation, where the pins would represent the dots. So, continuing on, that is, piety, justice, fortitude, and wisdom, together with the annex of all the virtues, represent the ruler of the world, the company of, this term, necessariarum, didn't seem to have any translation, but changed the F's to S's, and it read of necessity. So the company of necessity, or the company of the necessity. So too, for the protection of the safety of your kingdoms, I have chosen the example of the others, preferring the torch, burning it and making it strong, for those who are, this term, it didn't translate to anything, so I ended up doing more of the passage itself, and it translated to, for what is yours in virtue of virtue, especially in the worship of piety, will be commended almost to poverty by the insignia that their works are not mentioned anywhere, and throughout all Hungary, Bohemia, Austria, and the corners of the hereditary provinces, with enormous titles of merit, engraved in an indelible character. Now, indelible, just meaning making marks that cannot be erased or removed, or basically impossible to eliminate, to forget or change. Engraved an unforgettable or indelible character for the memory of all eternity. But these are bound up with a piety so eloquent, which has by no means hitherto, which means up to this time or until now, circumscribed. Circumscribed meaning bordered or surrounded or possibly defined. So in context would be, which has by no means until now defined or surrounded the limits of the Papa. Papa translated to nothing, so I ended up using most of the passage. It then reads as follows: which are by no means circumscribed by the limits of the present, or extended to the very ends of the Roman territory, where the great monument of ancient piety, collapsing with the old age of the times, the ecclesia. Now this could be meaning a few things, potentially the political assembly of citizens of an ancient Greek state, a congregation, or the collective body of Christian believers, regarded as constituting a universal church. So unsure which definition would fit. I'm leaning towards the first one. Continuing on, and the mountain of, now this term, the mountain of Daipar, I don't believe translated to anything. I did more of the Latin passage, including the ecclesia or ecclepium in the Latin counterpart, and it reads as follows: Ecclesiastes and the mountain of Daipara and the mighty Eustace the magician. So Daipara or Dipara translated to I'm sorry, which is strange. Maybe the mountain of apologies, the mountain of sorrow. I then briefly researched Eustace the magician. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that correctly, but it seemed to be, what seemed to be the most relevant was a character named Eustace the monk, who apparently, according to his biography, went to Toledo, Spain and studied black magic. This may be the same character, unknown. Also, going back to the ecclesia term, while we translated this entire passage, it translated to Ecclesiastes. Now, Ecclesiastes is a book from the Bible. However, the word derives from the Greek word ecclesia, so meaning assembly, or can mean a member of assembly. So going back to ecclesia, the first term that I postulated it meaning was the political assembly of citizens of an ancient Greek state. So I think we can conclude that that was the intended definition, or the intended meaning for that term. You'll have to let me know in the comments if you have any more data points regarding this. So, moving on. Which the zeal of your majesty had infuriated with its own fire, and destroyed the, this term, changing the F to an S. I don't have if I've changed both, maybe just the first one. Reads as untrustworthy. So, and destroyed the untrustworthy and the most abundant, made anew for the perpetual devotion of those nations. Let them speak of thee, let men be silent, let the beauty of the church be restored, and the altars of the church, and the altars of the altars, and the lamps of the eternal. Now this term didn't have a meaning, but changing the F to an S then reads as Austrian. So, of the eternal Austrian, besmeared with the fire of piety. In short, we have ipfa and colophi in Latin specifically. It's the same with their Latin counterparts. They did not translate to anything either. However, changing the F's to S's, it then reads she and the giants, which is interesting. So, she and the giants are the mute interpreters and preachers of all the great virtues. What more shall I say of the incredible knowledge with which you possess the skillful arts, divine as well as human, who have paved the way for you to attain to crowns, to laurels. Laurel is, I believe, to mark with distinction. To make the least, the snow makes all the more, so that therefore as many words as you pour out, you seem to compose as many laws, no less unrefracted by the dictation of Themis. Themis is the goddess of or the personification of justice, divine order, law, and custom, and is actually represented as the statue of the blindfolded woman holding the scale in one hand and the sword in the other, usually in front of buildings related to justice, because the statue is called the Scales of Justice. So that checks out. Capable as you prove and unshackled by your own work and example, the leaves of so much learning and the foundations of skill had long since been thrown from you, when you spent your youth in the frequent reading of history and in the study of past things. I wanted to educate him, in the end, so that having penetrated into the archives of republics and penetrated into the secrets of kingdoms, he would control the reins of empire, what to imitate, what to flee, and see through the example and memory of these. And escaping from destruction, you would take documents from the famous and useful gifts of the ancients, some of the profane, for the most intimate practice of deeds. How many things would be too much for me to say here about the admirable gifts of the mind and the faithfulness, with the support of which you are strengthened to the end of the mass of the world with exhaustion. I will say that Fed uses as many as possible, but many more have been used to drink with venerable admiration, to be pressed and filled with pain, but that I, in the light of the virtues. Now, these two terms, they seem to be meaningless. However, changing the first F to an S reads as follows. It says, his fate. And then changing the second F to an S, but leaving the first one, reads, it's enough. And then changing both of them to S's reads, he is satisfied with his own. So, in the light of the virtues fate, or in the light of the virtues is enough, or maybe in the light of the virtues he is satisfied. Trust myself to grasp the breadth of the breadth of the patents with the narrowness of fasting prayer. I will be silent here. The ingenious velvet from this term here translates directly to it's hot. So possibly the ingenious velvet from the heat for you, Mercury. It doesn't really make sense to say the hot. Moving on. The abundance of eloquence I conceived from Apollo, the faculty of universal mathematics and of harmonics, combined with the discipline of ethics, which governs minds, all the equipment of the whole world, with which your breast, greatly Caesar, by now this Pallas Ipha. So Ipha seemed to translate to she, but right? I think by changing the F to an S. Nope, scratch that. I've got, before Ipha seemed to translate to she, but translating the three apellad or appellade Ipha, the Latin term, in this context, changing the F to an S, it then read from Pallas itself sufficiently. So then the sentence may read, by Pallas itself sufficiently covered by the universal world, admires and venerates. Now, just as a side, Pallas, Pallas, was a Titan god of battle and warcraft. However, it seems to me that we must not be silent here about that incredible patronage and love of letters that we have favored, with which all the, this term, just, it translated to nothing, but changing the F to an S, then translate to muses. So with which all the muses have been complexed in their innermost sustenances, that he who came to this term, the Latin translated to, it alone translated to I will eat, but that's probably not it. It seems to be some sort of character, but as of now it's unknown. Let me know what you think. So continuing on, that he who came to Cepharius to serve in this, just changing the two F's to S's, is necessary. So serve in a necessary manner, as you do not know the study and skill of foreign languages, with which thou art wondrously inculcated, and thus willst transfer to others the immense riches of thy soul. In this term is Vienna. So in Vienna, thy metropolis of the East, thou hast founded the Athenian idiom. Now, just as a side, Athenian is pertaining to Athens, Greece, while idiom is a style of speaking or lingo. So the Athenian vernacular or dialect. So from the top, has founded the Athenian idiom by a rare example and by the undoubted inspiration of God, so that the Eastern Empire of the Western Empire, by the reciprocal exchange of languages, is of course a great republic, with the glory of your glorious name, mortal, united confederates. But I do not want to be rash and insulting in the greatness of so many works, which it exceeds the extent of the speaker to extend the odd pen beyond, where it is safer and more convenient for the splendor of so many merits to be admired rather with conniving eyes with the universal world, lest the contemplator of majesty be oppressed by glory, preferably when neither the modesty of your majesty can do it, in the dignified and enormous greatness of the mind, and in such a diminution or diminution, this means a process of diminishing. So that would potentially read, and in such a lessening or reduction of the mind, threemost Caesar, and that folly is the reason of my impatience, that I should read you such and so much as. Now this term again, I don't know if I did this on the previous page, but I just replaced the F with an S. The Latin is Cepharum, and it just translates to of the Caesars. So that may read, that I should read you such and so much as Caesars, or the Caesars, of one of the guardians of this work, to whom this and all other pledges of my devout fervor are not due from one head. When you become the fool, we became the arbiter of things. Who can judge this new birth, the flood of things from the first, the variety of the gifts given to the kings of Egypt, and the rarity of overflowing with the balance of the admirable creation, and vindicate the taunts of the slanderers by the authority of your power, conferring safety on that innovation no one will dare to dare, because I am not afraid of interrupting my intention with the gravest cares of the world. To be sure, we will lift up the same and humanize the humility of the leaf of my, this term translated directly to performance. So, of the leaf of my performance from the whispering of majesty, so that you may interpolate graciously, invite, encourage the doubting soul, encourage the hesitant. Hence it was done that this work of, now this term, I translated the whole Latin passage and it still came up as this SAC period and then CEF period. So it translated as it says, so that this work, though unworthy of faith in the eyes of SAC, CAEF, and then majestatis or majesty. So unsure on this one. I'll just continue. In the eyes of majesty, he was unworthy of faith and narrowed down, yet he was, now this term, I believe, is just Augustus, yet he was Augustus even with this title, and he became worthy of life, because Augustus gave it, the bountifulness of which he had been promoted to the public light by many kings, wherefore most this term did not quite translate, so I just translated a few more terms in the Latin counterparts, and then again changing the F to an S, and the passage then reads, whence the most municipal Caesar. So I return all 5 praises to thee in the glory of my service, which have given myself, I repay thee. This work is not so much mine as thine. I have done it in the most generous way. Farewell to the support of Christians or the Christian world. The idea of the, here's this term again, the Caesars, and the delight of the human race. This I give in Rome in the year 1676, on the 9th of June, Primo and Feliciano MM Facro. That seems to be how it read. Who exists as a, now this, bear with me, Geneth Laicus, or what do we have here? Genethliac. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly. I thought it was a mistranslation. However, it is an English term for someone who calculates horoscopes. So maybe in relation to a modern day astrologer. And I do believe this is quite common for people of majesty or kingship or royalty to have an astrologer or mystic. Feel free to comment on that. Moving on. As your majesty of, again, Caesars, so also becomes the preface of the, now this term directly translated to performance. So it could be that, however, again, changing the F to an S, it reads as following. So possibly, so also becomes the preface of the performance of your happiness, or the preface of the following of your happiness, and the whole republic. Christian's lucky prelude. So that was the initial section of this book, the Tower of Babel. I mean, what a start. Incredibly interesting, to say the least. There are 3 more chapters within this book, and in all honesty, I may take a break from this book and do some smaller works before tackling the rest of this text. This was a monumental task for my first crack at this type of work, and I truly bit off more than I could chew. So in the background playing, we have the additional index that is after this introduction that has been translated, and we'll just scroll it through while I conclude. For those listening, if you would like to hear more and want this series or type of video to continue, just let me know. If you liked this video and found it enjoyable or entertaining or educational, give it a like, guys. Leave a comment, your favorite parts or information, passages, or even blunders. I can't edit everything, or this video would never get finished. That's why you hear me stumbling and dead air and trying to pronounce words multiple times. I do edit, of course, but imagine what I leave out. Brought together in divine service with an abominable abomination. An abominable abomination. That sounds terrible. Virtues fat? Is that like feng shui, but fui or full of fat? Fui. Every part of the studies for God and the people wow. Faith, oh my goodness. No one will dare to dare, because I am not afraid of interrupting my intention with the gravest cares of the world. The proverbial mic drop. Nay, the proverbial pen drop. Wow. That is literally the equivalent though of not giving a 5 blind men drunken with the potion of ambition, 5 maddened by the fury of a foolish mind. Oh, don't tempt me with a good time. Yes, I am merely mortal. As I mentioned, this is the equivalent of a shot in the dark. I am no expert. I'm just a nerd who enjoys this type of work, approaching this type of information with the intent to learn. I truly hope these types of videos attract those of you that can take this info in objectively and logically and provide any data points you might have in regards to material such as this. And on top of that, it's just enjoying this weird thing that I do, collecting and apparently now reading old texts. Having the ability to put these through a translator and read such interesting works like this it's kind of like Indiana Jones to me, which sounds lame, but that's it. Like searching through these old books, reading about giants, epic catastrophes, the building and destruction of monumental structures, the confusion of languages, gods and figures of history like Caligula or Pythagoras, Apollo, Mercury, the Austrian Atlanteans. Is this real, or is this a complete work of fiction? Maybe a parable or a legend. Maybe there are truths hidden within for those curious and interested enough to look. That's up to you to decide. If nothing else, these are incredibly interesting stories. If you have any interesting data points regarding the reading, please post them. I enjoy reading all your comments and appreciate the feedback. This is most definitely long-form content and not for the faint of heart. Hopefully these videos can be something you might listen to on a drive or commute, maybe at work, or just relaxing at home. I very much value your time And for those that stayed through the whole reading, I cannot express how much that means. Thank you. So as this inaugural episode comes to a close, I wanted to include a bonus of potentially the next few videos I would like to tackle, or at least after the Tower of Babel. They are from the Pleasant Gallery of the World book series from the 16th century, I believe. They include many just beautiful illustrations, which I'll also translate for context. So let's take a look at this one. We're starting off on the title page. It reads as follows: The Pleasant Gallery of the World, where one sees in a large number of very accurate cards and beautiful prints the main empires, kingdoms, republics, provinces, cities, towns, and fortresses, with their situation and what they have most remarkable: islands, coasts, rivers, seaports, and other considerable places of old and new geography, antiques, abbeys, churches, academies, colleges, libraries, palaces, and other buildings, both public and private, as to country houses, the dresses and more of peoples, their religion, games, feasts, ceremonies, pomps, and magnificence, animals, trees, plants, flowers, some temples and idols of the pagans, and other rarities worth seeing, in the 4 parts of the universe, divided into 66 tomes, the stamps having been defined on the places and engraved exactly by the famous Leuken, Mulder, Jory, Baptist, Stopendal, and other renowned masters, with a short description which precedes each empire, kingdom, and even with the contents for each plate. The whole collected with much hay, work, and expense, for the utility, for the pleasure of the lovers of history and geography. That's us. This part includes the first tome of China and Great Tartaria. I know Tartaria is a very substantial topic within this community. I have many questions about it. Maybe you do too. Of course, one book will not give us all the answers, but surely it can provide some more nuance and data points for us to explore. So, if you would like to learn about this first tome of China and Great Tartaria, you can learn about it with me.